Today on Inside Utah Politics, the race is on for the top job in Salt Lake County. We interview both candidates to help Utahns make their decisions. Cutting down the cost of Ozempic, how a Senate panel says the high price of the drug is affecting Americans. State lawmakers sign off on downtown revitalization. What needs to happen now for that plan to take effect?
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. I'm Brien McElhatten. Let's go inside Utah politics now. Election day, less than 2 months away, if you can believe that. And with a lot of the big races on the ballot, we thought we'd drill down on a local race that could affect the lives of over 1 million Utahns. That's a big deal. Salt Lake County Mayor's office is on the ballot. It's a big, big job with many major issues like the Great Salt Lake, homelessness, and the Olympics often falling on that one person's plate. So we thought we should get to know the candidates. So let's do that now. Joining me today, we have local attorney Erin Ryder. She's the Republican nominee to challenge incumbent Mayor Jenny Wilson for the top job in Utah's largest county. Welcome to Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here. And before we jump into some of the issues, why don't you kind of introduce yourself and tell us why you wanted to run for this office?
Absolutely. So I grew up here in Salt Lake County, have lived here most of my life, went to BYU and studied business management, and then I worked for a small healthcare startup in South Jordan, managing large sales teams here in Salt Lake and in Dallas, Texas. Decided to go back to school, so I went back east to Washington, D.C. and got my JD MBA degrees from Georgetown University, and had a chance to work as a law clerk on the Senate Finance Committee while I was there under Senator Orrin Hatch. And then went to Boston for a couple years, worked for a large law firm before coming back to Salt Lake. So I do corporate law. It's a lot of mergers and acquisitions, contract negotiation, things like that. And you know, getting into this race, one of the reasons I decided to run is because I was concerned about quality of life in Utah coming back after having been on the East Coast. I came back because I miss the quality of life that we have here in Salt Lake in particular, and seeing some of the changes in the valley from the time that I'd been away, issues like you mentioned, housing affordability, homelessness, crime rates, access to resources. You know, I chose not to stay on the East Coast for a reason. I don't want to see us become the next Boston or the next DC or the next San Francisco. And sometimes the only way you change the direction of the ship is to change out the captain.
Well, let's talk about some of the issues. Big public safety bond on the ballot this November, $500 million, a number of things included, consolidating 2 jails into 1, some homeless services. I know your opponent, Jenny Wilson, supports it. How do you feel about it?
One of the big things I'm really concerned about is cost of living in Salt Lake County and the cost to taxpayers in particular. A lot of people, we pay a lot of money into Salt Lake County every year in property taxes, and a lot of people have no idea what that money actually goes towards. The county has a $2 billion budget every single year, and yet the most common refrain that comes out of the county is, there's no money, there's no money, there's no money. And to sit here and to say, we're gonna put $500 million on the ballot, put it on taxpayers' backs with interest to tear down 2 jails and build a new one, to me says, what are you doing? I cannot believe that's the only option on the table to deal with public safety. And that's a fraction of the cost that taxpayers could really be looking at for this plan that my opponent has. So I look at that and I think, look, I'm very much in support of public safety and in wanting to address homelessness and some of these issues on the table. But $500 million, where is $2 billion going every year such that you now need to add $500 million on taxpayers' backs? It screams just an incredible amount of being out of touch with constituents.
One of the items on that issue would be homeless services and changing the way the city does that, the county does that. The city often asks the county to do more with the homeless situation, to work with Salt Lake City in different ways. How do you see that relationship, and how would you like to see it change, perhaps?
Yeah, homelessness absolutely needs to be something that the county is more proactive about, because it's not just a city issue at this point, right? Yes, Salt Lake City has a homeless population, but so does Mill Creek, so does West Valley, so does Sandy, so do a lot of other places around the valley. And it's difficult for any one city to have the resources necessary to truly deal with that. For example, if someone's on the street in Sandy, but all of the resources are in downtown Salt Lake, how do they even know those resources exist, let alone get there? So I look at that and I think, the county is responsible for the county health department. This falls directly underneath that. We need to be very proactive about it. And the fact that my opponent has been in office in the county government for nearly 20 years at this point and is just now coming up with a plan for addressing homelessness, I mean, come on, this is years too late in the making. We need to be dealing with the issues, the whole pipeline of homelessness. How do we keep people from ending up on the street in the first place, and then take down some of the roadblocks so they can get off the street down the road? For example, if you don't have a physical address or a government ID, how do you get a job? How do you get an apartment? How do you pass a background check? Right? Those are relatively simple things that we should be able to solve, barriers that we should be able to take down that don't actually cost taxpayers a lot of money to address.
Something I want to circle back to, you mentioned a few moments ago, housing affordability. You said a lot of people talk to you about that and ask you about that. I think in June, the median home price in Salt Lake County was $580,000. Yeah. How do we begin to help out people who can't afford to live here?
Yeah. One of the things that I want to do, if elected, is to put in place a 10-year plan for the growth and development of the county, and to look at this from a long-term perspective as opposed to kind of the 1 to maybe 5-year cycles that a lot of politicians look at. And as part of that, we look at how do we address housing affordability. The county, I think the county is in the middle of an identity crisis right now. 20 years ago, it needed to be both a municipal and a regional government. But today, that's no longer the case. We're wall-to-wall city at this point, and a lot of those cities are trying to take that municipal responsibility themselves. But the county's never fully adapted to that change, and it's causing friction and competition with the cities. I want to go in and I want to figure out what are the core competencies of the county as a regional government, and how do we move it into the future instead of holding on to the past. And through housing affordability, how do we look at this from a regional perspective, right? We have a lot of haphazard development popping up around the county right now. How do we look at this from a long-term perspective and say, okay, we have a lot of development in West Jordan. How do we make sure we have the infrastructure in West Jordan to address that? How do we make sure that we've got the resources necessary for redevelopment in Sandy? And you bring those mayors and those city councils to the table and say, let's do this collectively so that we don't wake up in 10 years and find ourselves in an environment that we really wish we didn't have.
A part of that, we talk about the Great Salt Lake. We know the reservoirs in the county feed the Great Salt Lake. How do we balance development with nursing the Great Salt Lake back to health?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the Jordan River is certainly a big part of that. Sure. And looking at the dynamics of the river, I mean, that all falls under the county's jurisdiction in a lot of ways, and there's some overlap with the state as well. So yes, resource access is a big part of this. How do we look at making sure that we're addressing non-native plants and species that are consuming too much water and sucking water out that needs to go to the Great Salt Lake? How do we look at incentives or rebates for folks who are wanting to xeriscape or put native plants in their yards? Things like that. There are a lot of things that we can do there. There's a lot of creativity. I really want to bring an air of civic innovation to some of these problems and to say, let's find some new ways of solving these rather than just increasing taxes and throwing money at it.
What's been the biggest surprise of campaigning so far? Because that's a full-time job and then some, isn't it?
Yeah. I would say the biggest surprise so far is the fact that Abravanel Hall has become one of the seminal issues of this campaign.
Right.
That if you had told me in January that I would spend a lot of my time talking about Abravanel Hall, I would have said, what are you talking about? But it has become a massive, massive issue in this campaign, and I think it really highlights the fact that we have a real lack of leadership at the county level this year. We have someone who frankly has been playing games and is more concerned about her own legacy and the wishes of a billionaire than the needs and desires of this community. And to that end, I'd actually love to announce that I just recently received the endorsement of Carolyn Abravanel, the widow of Maurice Abravanel, who is endorsing me in this campaign and wants to convey that to the community.
How meaningful is that endorsement to you?
It's so meaningful. I mean, I can't even tell you the fact that she's willing to stand up and to take a risk like this for herself and to say, look, this is Maurice's legacy. This is my family's legacy. And we need to make sure that we take care of not only the building, but the symphony itself. And to, in her words, right, this isn't a Republican or a Democrat issue. This is about doing the right thing. And to me, that means the world that she's willing to take that risk, because I think it showcases how frustrating and how emotionally heartbreaking this whole process has been, and the utter lack of transparency that has come out of my opponent's office.
Erin Ryder, I appreciate the conversation. So good to talk to you, get to know you a little bit. Yeah, and continued luck campaigning there.
Thank
I know
you so much.
That's a lot to do. Thanks for being here. Hey, still ahead here on Inside Utah Politics, primary voting issues in Utah County. Have you heard about these? How they're working with the state to make things right before November. Stay with us, everybody. Lawmakers brought industry experts to D.C. to discuss the high cost of diabetes and weight loss drugs in America. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders says the drugs they don't need to cost as much as they do, and they could help millions of Americans if they were more affordable. Currently, pharmaceutical company Novo Nordisk charges Americans $969 a month for Ozempic and $1,349 a month for Wegovy. Sanders says the same drugs are more affordable in Europe and in Canada, and the price tag is hurting patients.
I started rationing my Ozempic. It's the same playbook that happened back in 2016 when I started rationing my insulin.
Now, a Novo Nordisk spokesperson told us this summer 80% of people with insurance that covers the drug pay $25 or less per prescription. The company's CEO will appear at a hearing this week. The Lieutenant Governor's office is working to address issues counting the ballots in Utah County. Their report found the county counted more ballots than voters during the June 25th primary election. They say at least 19 more ballots were cast than people who signed in to vote. The report blames a new system called FastCast. The system is unique to Utah County. It was only implemented for this year's primary. The report also does not rule out the possibility that people voted without signing in, which is a violation of state law. The Utah County Clerk says they're already moving forward with recommendations from that report, including an overhaul of FastCast voting, weekly trainings on signature verification, and improvements to procedures.
We're going to verify, have the person show their ID, check them in the poll pad, and then count them here on site once we reconcile the number of who checked in with the number of ballots.
Now, to read more about the key findings in the report, including the issues with mail-in ballots, you can head to our website, abc4.com. The Utah Supreme Court will hear oral arguments this week in the controversial Amendment D case. You've probably been following along here. This comes after a judge ruled that ballots could be printed with the amendment on them, but votes cast on it would not be counted. Soon after, the legislature appealed that decision, bringing the issue to the state's highest court. The question on Amendment D has quickly become one of the hot topics leading up to the November election. The court will hear arguments on the case Wednesday at 9:30 in the morning. The plan to use tax dollars to help develop the area of downtown around the Delta Center is one step closer to reality now. The committee overseeing the plan in the Utah legislature gave its unanimous approval. Our Jonathan May has more on this.
Please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously.
The Utah Revitalization Zone Committee, led by Senator Dan McKay, gave their approval. Here's a look at the endorsed project area. The Smith Entertainment Group says it's all centered around the Delta Center, staying put.
There are no two arenas, there's no new location. The Delta Center would be renovated and would be home to both the Utah Jazz and Utah Hockey Club.
A main concern for the committee centered around Abravanel Hall. Salt Lake leaders say it's not going anywhere.
We want the symphony to thrive for the next 50 years and beyond, and I'm committed, as I have been from day one, to keeping the hall as is, where it is.
The committee also listened to people not for a potential 0.5% raise in the Salt Lake City sales tax to help pay for the redevelopment.
It's been stated multiple times here that the public wins, we don't win, and instead we pay when inflation is at a record high.
And should be replaced with alternative financing. Thank you.
The Smith Entertainment Group and the city hopes this vision comes to life by 2033. It seems the NBA and NHL are here to stay downtown.
Truly a legislative and municipal desire, and was not the original desire of the developer or the owner of the team. So that, I think you see this type of investment only because the local effort really wanted to keep the team downtown.
That was our Jonathan May reporting that story. The plan now heads to the Salt Lake City Council. They have until the end of the year to pass approvals and adopt the new sales tax increase. We'll keep you posted, of course. Still to come here on Inside Utah Politics, Salt Lake County Mayor Jenny Wilson joins IUP, why she says voters in Utah's biggest county should keep her on the job.
Watching Inside Utah Politics.
Welcome back to Inside Utah Politics. We're continuing our interview series today and profiling the candidates running for mayor in Salt Lake County. Earlier today, we spoke with Erin Ryder, the Republican challenger, and now we're joined by Jenny Wilson, Salt Lake County's incumbent mayor, running now for a second full term. Mayor Wilson, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you being here.
It's great to be here.
So you need no introduction, really, but tell us why you wanted to run again, right? This is a lot of work holding this office. Why do it again?
You know what? The county matters, and I want people to be reminded how much Salt Lake County does for people and their families. We're parks, we're recreation, we're aging services, including Meals on Wheels. We work on mental health issues in our community. Along with my colleague, the sheriff, we own and operate the Salt Lake County Jail. Arts and culture in downtown, the visitor economy, all of that is Salt Lake County. We do it very well there. I'm proud of the work that we do. We do it in a manner that is always conscientious at the bottom line for our constituents. We are AAA bond rated, which sounds a little whatever, but it really allows us to do more with the tax dollar, and we balance our budgets every year. We're proud of that.
I want to ask you about tax dollars. Big public safety bond on the ballot, about $500 million. Your opponent, Erin Ryder, has expressed concerns about that. She said that it would balloon the county's budget. It would put a burden on the taxpayers. How do you respond to that?
Well, it will be an additional $5 per month if we pass this bond on the average household, the average house valuation in the county. And that's important to us, that we are aware of the significance of raising taxes. However, we're going to pay for it in the end regardless with criminal justice activity, and this is a way of getting ahead of it. The bond is important. What's interesting is it's a bipartisan proposal. The governor supports it, Mayor Mendenhall of Salt Lake City supports it, and 8 out of 9 council members across party lines support this plan. Ultimately, we're going to be building a new center for low-level offenders so they don't show up at our jail and get let out the next day. And, you know, a hardened jail cell is sometimes not the best choice for someone who's facing addiction and low-level crimes. So there's a lot to this bond, but it changes the nature of our community. It's the right investment.
Homeless services is part of this bond as well. So on that note, let me ask you, what do you think is going right in how the county assists its unhoused population, and what do you think could go better?
Yeah, well, I know there's a lot of frustration in the community, and I'll tell you, when we have a business impacted by, or a resident in any section of our county by homeless camps or other sort of chaos in the community, it's not a good thing. But it's also not good for the individual, right? So we care, we want to get it right. Salt Lake County has invested over the years in solutions. COVID kind of turned everything upside down. Our resource providers and our county staff and everyone was hustling to just try and deal with the new normal and the challenge. We've now unpacked that. The county, under my leadership and direction, has come up with a multifaceted plan for criminal justice reform. The bond's part of that. Also homelessness, addiction, and challenges in the community related to these matters. The plan is set. We are working to implement it as we speak, and we're seeing progress.
Something else I want to ask you about, housing affordability. It's on the minds of everybody. It's the #1 issue people talk about here. Salt Lake County over the summer had a median home price of $580,000. What role does the county have in helping to sort through this affordability problem? It's affecting everybody.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because we have 23 municipalities in our county. Each has their own planning and zoning. So we're not able to master plan all of our city's actions around density, good practices, and increasing supply. Some cities are doing better than others, frankly. The state has a role. They have a very active role because they can actually regulate the policy that the cities follow. So our role is coordination, education, and working through a lot of grants and support. We have supported the development of 17,000 units recently, and we fill the gap with funding when a developer wants to do the right thing, build more affordable housing. And we also facilitate a lot of grants and support to our cities and housing projects.
Talk about Abravanel Hall. It's really become a hot issue when we talk about downtown development, right? Carolyn Abravanel endorsed your opponent. She's talked about that earlier on the show. First, your reaction to that.
Well, the Abravanel Hall matter has been an interesting one and a hard one. First, I want to say I love that hall. I remember Carolyn's husband, who worked with my father back in the 70s. There's been a lot of confusion around the issue because, first and foremost, we're trying to figure out the broader plan, not just Abravanel Hall. For that reason, I think there's been some sense that I have not been willing to preserve the hall, and I have announced that indeed we're going to preserve the hall, not rebuild it. And I think that the challenge as we've looked at the viability of the symphony and a lot of development needs downtown, as I think led to some confusion. So I'm excited that we are rolling out preliminary plans to assess the need for a renovation, and that's an exciting thing for our community.
So you're committing to preserve Abravanel Hall in its current location. Do you have an idea of what it might look like in a few years? Or?
Well, we did a survey, and I think one interesting fact is this survey was commissioned long before we looked at hockey and the changing nature of downtown. And to deal with air conditioning, changing the long seats, which aren't convenient for anyone, some problems with the lobby, and maybe expand a little bit with a broader, bigger lobby so people can not be so, crunched in there. Those are many of our goals. The cost on that, because it's a 45-year-old building and it's a large building and we don't want to impact the acoustics, is in upwards of $200 million. So we need to go to the community, the state, and others and raise that money. And then we can roll out a new visionary plan for that beautiful hall.
How do you characterize this moment for Salt Lake County? We talk about downtown development, we talk about the hockey team coming, the future of Abravanel Hall. All of this is sort of coming together and people are talking about it. Describe this moment and what this means for the county going forward.
Well, I look back to the leadership of many people. Governor Cal Rampton years ago, my father, Ted Wilson, Jack Gallivan, who was a publisher but this really committed business leader downtown. They came together to create what we now have, and that led to the framework for bringing in the Utah Jazz. We're now adding hockey. We're looking at an Olympic Games in less than 10 years. And the section of the Salt Palace we're talking about renovating just immediately adjacent from the Delta Center between City Creek, it needs some love, it needs some attention. So this is a generational opportunity to rebuild. Everybody wins. We keep our Abravanel Hall as is, but improve it in location. And we also add a sports team to the Utah Jazz, keeping the Jazz downtown. And most exciting to me is this idea of this amazing community gathering place.
You mentioned the Olympics, 10 years out. What's priority number one to get us ready?
Oh, we've got a few things to do. We have to refresh venues. We built them, so we're in good shape. We expect to have a surplus from those games, so unlike many other nations, communities in the world, we're in really good shape. We've got a great leadership team around the games. We're excited. Really what I hope most is, and I will work for this, I continue to, that these are the community's games. We did it well once. Let's do it better this time. Let's make sure that every kid in our community gets to one of the events and has that opportunity. And this isn't just a TV show or even a great promotion for our community, but it's the community's games, and they're special to us all.
Mayor Jenny Wilson, thank you for spending time with us and talking with us, and best of luck there on the campaign.
Thank you.
I wish your opponent the same thing. I know campaigning is a lot of work, so continued luck with that. Hey, stay with us, everybody. More Inside Utah Politics coming up right after this. That does it for today's Inside Utah Politics. Don't forget, though, if you have any local political stories you'd like to see or hear more about, make sure to reach out to us. You can email InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow along with me on social media, on X @Brien Reports, and on Instagram. You can search for Brien McElhatten. And you can find ABC4 on social media too to follow along no matter where you are. And while you're at it, you can download the ABC4 News app. We are always on there. Thanks so much for being with us, everybody. We'll see you right back here on Inside Utah Politics next week.